In the sleepy country town of Scottswell, located in Kentucky, lived the Doolin family. Brian and Emily were the parents of 3 children, the eldest son Jake, the youngest Tyler, and daughter Gabbrielle, born on December 26, 2007. Scottswell, with a population of just over 4,000, was a quiet place where farming was traditionally considered the main occupation of the residents. In this small town steeped in patriarchy, most of the townspeople were well acquainted with each other, or at the very least had an idea of each local family. There wasn't too much entertainment in Scottsville, so school sports were very popular with residents of all ages. The city school had extensive athletic fields for soccer, baseball, and tennis. These facilities regularly hosted various matches and competitions, attendance at which became something of a tradition for many townspeople. The Doolin family was no exception. Eldest son Jake was on the school soccer team, and little Gabbrielle started in the cheerleading squad. In November 2015, the most important game of the soccer season was to take place. Scottswell's team with the best players from the school met with opponents from the neighboring county. The event was eagerly awaited by all the locals. Gabbrielle's older brother Jake was a member of the main school team. The 7-year-old girl herself was not too interested in the match itself, but was looking forward to playing and having fun with the other children. Gabbrielle's parents initially wanted to leave their youngest daughter at home under the care of a relative with her brother Tyler. However, the girl convinced them to take her with them to the game. On the evening of November 14th, the whole family went to the school stadium. In addition to most of the local residents eager to support their team, there were also quite a few fans from the neighboring county attending the game. As soon as the Doolin family arrived at the stadium, Gabbrielle spotted her cheerleader girlfriends and asked her mother for permission to go to them. The woman allowed her daughter to do so, but warned her not to leave the school grounds and to stay close to other children. After that, the mother headed to the bleachers for the fans, and Gabbrielle ran to her friends. Over the next hour, the girl ran up to her mother several times and then ran off again to play with other children. At one point, she also ran to her father, who was in a special staff room from where he was making various announcements over loudspeakers to the spectators. Gabbrielle asked her dad for money to buy something tasty from the treat stall, after which she ran away again. After a while, Gabbrielle's friends came running to her mother, who was sitting in the stands. The woman immediately looked anxiously at the girls, but did not see her daughter among them. The frightened friends asked Mrs. Doolin if she had seen Gabbrielle. They replied that they had decided to play hide and seek, and Gabbrielle had to look for them. The girls hid in the school bathroom and waited for quite a while, but their friend never came. Deciding that they had won, they finally came out of hiding and started calling out for Gabbrielle by name, searching all the places where they usually played, but she seemed to have vanished into thin air. Then the friends thought that she might have gone to the stands to her mother and hurried there. However, the girl was not in the stands. Her mother immediately sounded the alarm and ran to her husband, Brian Doolin. Together they began to search the school stadium, asking acquaintances if they had seen their daughter. Gradually, other adults began to join the search. The parents searched the entire perimeter of the stadium, but failed to find any trace of Gabbrielle. Back at the stadium, the father made a loud announcement over the speakers, calling for his missing daughter to respond if she could hear his voice. But that didn't happen. By then, the match was at halftime and fans were returning to their seats in the stands. Gabbrielle's mother ran among them and asked everyone she knew if they had seen her daughter. Some adults joined the search too, scouring every corner of the area around the stadium. At Brian Dolin's request, staffers turned on lights at the baseball field, illuminating a path leading to a small wooded area. Several people walked the trail, but no sign of the girl was found there either. About 20 minutes after Gabbrielle's disappearance became apparent, her parents made the decision to contact police. Officers immediately arrived at the school, listened to the stories of the girl's parents and friends, and then began organizing a large-scale search by the entire city police department. For the small Scottswell Police Department, a missing child case was an extremely serious incident, as their sleepy town had virtually no offenses of this nature. The officers immediately began to consider the worst-case scenario, the possible kidnapping of the girl. In this case, they faced a serious problem. If Gabbrielle had indeed been kidnapped, the perpetrator was probably still in the stadium among hundreds of spectators, and the soccer match was about to end. after which people would go home, including the possible kidnapper. So the police decided to stop the game and completely cordon off the stadium, not letting anyone outside. Officers controlled every exit, preventing spectators from leaving the area. At the same time, the police refrained from announcing the reason for such strict measures, fearing that news of a possible child abduction could cause panic among people. Meanwhile, additional state police forces began arriving at the school to assist local officers. They started combing the neighborhood in search of traces of the missing girl. A group of police officers reached the baseball field and headed toward the neighboring woods along a lighted path. As they made their way along a small creek, they suddenly came across the body of little Gabbrielle lying right in the water. Having confirmed the child's death, the officers called an investigation team and forensic experts to the scene. Even with a cursory examination of the body, it was obvious that the cause of death was strangulation. The characteristic marks on the girl's neck were clearly visible. In addition, her partially naked body showed signs of sexual abuse. Experts seized the necessary evidence and samples from the crime scene for further analysis, including biological traces of the alleged killer. When the news of the gruesome discovery reached Gabbrie's parents, they were inconsolable. Her mother tried to rush towards the forest, but the police stopped her from seeing the horrifying sight. Meanwhile, the search for suspects at the stadium continued. Now that it was already a murder, and not just a missing child, investigators realized that the killer was most likely among the people they had locked in the school. The police officers needed to find out as soon as possible who among those present might have been involved in the heinous crime. To begin, detectives again interviewed Gabbrie's parents in detail, trying to find out if they recalled anyone suspicious at the stadium or if anyone had previously threatened their family. However, the parents swore that they had no enemies and had no idea who would have had the idea to kill their daughter. Investigators then interviewed the girl's friends, asking if they remembered anyone or anything strange shortly before Gabbrie's disappearance. The girls said that when they were hiding in the toilet, one of them caught a glimpse of a strange man in a woman's jacket near the entrance. Although she did not remember the details of the man's appearance, this fact could be of significant importance for the investigation. Further, the police managed to interview the cashier who sold tickets for the match. He recalled that at the beginning of the game, a strange man in a woman's jacket approached him and mumbled something inaudible, as if he was drunk. The cashier did not remember his appearance, but would have recognized the man if he had seen him again. After interviewing all the spectators in the stadium, investigators were able to gather numerous witness statements about a suspiciously behaving man named Timothy Madden, a local resident who belonged to one of Scottsville's most common families. According to eyewitness accounts, on the evening of the game, Timothy behaved in an extremely strange and distracted manner, which was completely out of character with his usual behavior. He was wearing a woman's jacket, and at one point hovered near the entrance to the women's restroom, attracting the attention of others. According to one of his distant relatives, Timothy usually reacted strongly to the games in which his youngest son participated, actively supporting him from the stands. However, that ill-fated evening, the man barely followed what was happening on the field, looked lost and indifferent to everything around him. Having received the first clues, the police decided to study the identity of Timothy Madden in more detail. It turned out that he was married, had 5 children, had no serious criminal offenses in the past, except for a couple of minor speeding tickets. The man didn't seem to stand out from many Scottswell residents. Nevertheless, the evidence demanded that Timothy be questioned as soon as possible. Police officers paid a visit to his home late at night. Upon opening the door, the man replied that he had heard about the girl's disappearance and murder, but had nothing to do with it. However, the detectives decided to go a little tricky and asked Timothy a provocative question, saying that they allegedly had video footage of him talking to Gabbrielle long before she disappeared. At first, Timothy replied that there was nothing of the sort, but then he suddenly changed his testimony, admitting that he had indeed exchanged a few words with the girl outside the stadium. He said he went outside for a smoke, at which time Gabbrielle ran past him, asking if he had seen her friends she was hiding from at the game. Madden showed her the direction the other girls had run off to, whereupon Gabbrielle left. Detectives found such an abrupt change in testimony odd, with the story itself indicating that the conversation occurred just minutes before the child disappeared, with no witnesses present. Next, investigators asked Timothy what he would do if his biological traces were found on the victim's body. The man answered quite calmly that he had no explanation for such a turn of events. At the end of the interrogation, Madden was asked to provide DNA samples and give for examination the clothes he wore at the stadium on the day of the murder. Timothy agreed to both requests, but when the police received the physical evidence, they were horrified to find what looked like dried blood on Madden's woman's jacket and underwear. When asked how he could explain it, Timothy replied that it was just dirt, but law enforcement was convinced otherwise. Further laboratory tests confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. The conducted DNA examination showed a 100% match between the biological traces of the criminal found on Gabbrie's body and Timothy Madden's samples, and the pathologist officially concluded that the cause of the girl's death was strangulation by the hands of an adult after a brutal sexual assault. Having received the entire body of incontrovertible evidence against Timothy Madden, the investigation brought the case to court, charging the man with the murder of a minor with particular cruelty. The prosecutor's office announced its intention to seek the capital punishment, the death penalty. In the run-up to the trial, Madden's lawyer made numerous attempts to challenge the evidence collected against his client. He argued that all of it had been obtained with numerous irregularities, and that the origin of some of the evidence, including witness statements, raised significant doubts about its reliability. The defense lawyer tried to grasp inconsistencies in details. For example, he referred to the fact that the girl's corpse was found in a body of water, and there were no traces of moisture on Timothy's clothes. He also claimed that in the evening after the game he behaved completely calmly, and nothing in his behavior gave away the person who committed the murder. However, the prosecutor's office countered these arguments with the irrefutable fact that Madden's seminal fluid was found on the victim's body. Aside from the blatantly far-fetched theories, there could only be one explanation. Thus, there was no doubt about Timothy's involvement in the murder of Gabbrielle Doolin. According to the investigation, the events of that evening could develop as follows. Coming out of the stadium, Madden really ran into Gabbrielle, looking for her girlfriends. The girl knew Timothy as the father of her cheerleader friend, so she could have approached him and told him about her search. Probably under some plausible pretext, Madden persuaded Gabbrielle to go with him outside the stadium, ostensibly to show him where her friends could hide. After moving a considerable distance into the woods, away from prying eyes, the man committed heinous acts of a sexual nature on the defenseless girl and then strangled her. After what he had done, Timothy apparently returned to the stadium in an attempt to act as if nothing had happened and blend in with the crowd of spectators. However, his confused look and attempts to hide in women's clothing were noticed by many eyewitnesses. Perhaps at that moment, the perpetrator already realized that he had done something terrible and could be exposed. Despite numerous attempts by the defense to challenge the evidence of Madden's guilt, their arguments were shattered by the fact that he alone, according to forensic evidence, could have been the rapist and murderer of Gabbrielle Doolin. The lawyers had nothing to refute this main pillar of the prosecution's case. The wait for the beginning of the trial on the murder case of Gabbrielle Doolin has dragged on for several years due to bureaucratic delays. For the family of the deceased girl, it became the most difficult ordeal. The parents demanded the harshest punishment for the perpetrator and longed for justice to be done as soon as possible. They were exhausted by endless postponements of hearing dates and red tape from the system. Finally, in 2019, the parties began discussing the possibility of a plea deal with the defendant. The prosecutor's office offered to waive the death penalty requirements and replace it with a life sentence for Timothy Madden if he admitted to the crime. After much hesitation, the parents agreed to this arrangement, as the prospect of an endlessly prolonged trial with the need to relive the agony of loss depressed them. Madden himself, who continued to deny involvement in the murder, initially rejected any offer of a deal. In the end, however, his lawyers persuaded him to accept the prosecutor's terms, which included only a public confession that the defendant had committed the crime. Madden was not required to disclose details of the atrocity, his motives, or details of what happened. An unprecedented scene took place in the courtroom during the plea deal procedure. After hearing the routine wording of the charges, Father Gabbrielle suddenly shouted at Madden, demanding that he repent before God and people, realizing the enormity of what he had done. Timothy's relatives also shouted in response, and a real verbal altercation between the two sides ensued, turning into personalities. The judge had to interrupt the session for a while and take the debauchees out of the room to restore order. In the end, against the protests of the victim's family, the deal-making procedure was brought to an end. Timothy Madden officially admitted to the murder of 7-year-old Gabbrielle Doolin, for which he received a life sentence without parole. He was transferred to a maximum security facility. When Madden was handed over to the escorts, he managed to shout, "I'm innocent," in the direction of journalists, but it did not matter. A year after Timothy Madden's conviction, one circumstance surfaced that indirectly indicated he might have a predisposition to commit serious sex crimes. A resident of a neighboring state who had seen a news report on the killing of Gabbrielle recognized Madden as the man who years earlier had tried to lure him and a friend into his car in a supermarket parking lot. True, there was no evidence of that incident, and the case was never prosecuted. Nevertheless, if this testimony was true, Timothy may have already attempted to commit child abuse long before the murder of Gabbrielle, and then, suddenly presented with an opportunity in the person of a defenseless, lonely girl, he could not stop himself and realized his horrible fantasies. The terrible tragedy, which occurred in Scottsville in November 2015, was a huge shock both for the Doolin family and for the entire small town. The murder of 7-year-old Gabbrielle Doolin exposed the darkest human vices, violence, cruelty, unbridled lust, that lurked beneath the mask of decency in this patriarchal community. The townspeople could not believe that the heinous crime was committed by one of their fellow citizens, the father of the family, who did not stand out from the crowd. Timothy Madden and his family were well known to many Scottswell residents, including close friends with the family of Gabbrielle herself. No one could have imagined that this man was capable of such an atrocity against a child. The long years since that fateful day have in no way diminished the pain of loss for the dead girl's parents. Brian and Emily Doolin continued to push hard for the harshest possible punishment for their daughter's killer. The sentence of life imprisonment became for them a kind of compromise after the grueling delays in the beginning of the trial. However, in their hearts, the parents did not find comfort from the fact that the criminal never repented, did not tell the details of the atrocity, and did not ask for their forgiveness. After all, the lack of realization of guilt made him deliberately speechless in front of the court. Just another trick, an attempt to somehow mitigate the inevitable retribution. After the announcement of the verdict in the courtroom, when Timothy Madden tried for the last time to shout some speech about his innocence, Brian Doolin could barely restrain himself from attacking him with fists. The only thing that stopped him was the thought that any action would delay the case and delay the judgment indefinitely. For several years after that court hearing, Brian and Emily Doolin lived like a fog, reliving the events of that tragic night in 2015 on a daily basis. Even the birth of their grandchildren could not displace the image of their maimed daughter from their hearts. The only comfort for the family was that the monster had gotten what he deserved and was locked up forever behind bars in one of the country's strictest prisons. The people of Scottswell were divided in their attitude to Timothy Madden. Some considered him an innocent victim of a miscarriage of justice, while others were convinced of his guilt, but could not understand the motives for such a monstrous act. People wondered what had driven this seemingly well-to-do man. Were there any prerequisites for committing such acts in his past? Or was it an isolated outbreak of madness, which became fatal for a random victim? Either way, the murder of Gabbrielle Doolin was an important lesson for the people of Scottswell. It showed that regardless of the outwardly respectable facade, the worst vices can hide behind it. Therefore, the citizens urged each other to be more vigilant about any, even the most insignificant at first glance, manifestations of suspicious behavior of others. After all, often the traces leading to a tragedy become visible only in hindsight, when nothing can be done. After that November night in 2015, Scottsville no longer had the serenity and blind faith that crime was happening somewhere outside of their small town. The case of Timothy Madden dispelled that myth forever, creating a sense of a white crow in their patriarchal community, a hidden threat that could not be anticipated or calculated in advance. It became a lesson in vigilance for the people of Scotswell, at the cost of a child's innocent life.